If you open your mouth to anyone, I'll bury you in the backyard, and no one will even come looking." That's what he said. No yelling, no shaking, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "My name is Mae Sullivan. I'm 80 years old. I was born and lived my whole life in Greenville, South Carolina. And what I'm about to tell you, sweetheart, isn't easy. But I've carried it in my chest for so many years that I just can't hold it in anymore. I was only 9 years old when everything started falling apart. Mama got sick that harsh winter when even the wind felt like it was slicing your skin. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But for me, it was simply the day our house went empty. In that simple wooden coffin, I saw Mama being taken away, and along with her, any hope we had left. My father, Raymond Sullivan, was left with 2 little girls in his hands, me and my baby sister Ruth, who was only 4 at the time. Ruth didn't really understand what had happened. She kept playing with her rag dolls, spinning around the room. I already knew life was about to change. At first, the neighbors came, knocked on the door with plates of food and words of pity, but soon they faded away. That's how neighbors are, right? Deep down, nobody wants to get involved in other people's problems. It was just the 3 of us left in that old wooden house. My father had always been a difficult man even before. Worked at the sawmill, came home every night exhausted, smelling of wood and cheap liquor. When Mama was alive, he still kept himself in check a little, but after she was gone, he turned into someone I'd never known. One of those nights, just a few weeks after the funeral, it began. I was lying in my bed, under the thin blanket, when I heard his footsteps down the hallway. Slow, heavy, each step made my heart pound harder. He stopped at the door and whispered, "Annie Mae, open the door, baby." I answered softly, trying to sound sleepy. "I'm sleeping, Daddy." But he already had the key. He opened the door slowly and came in, closed it behind him. That first time he just sat at the edge of my bed. He stroked my hair, a strange kind of caress that made my insides freeze. I pretended to be asleep. I didn't move, only prayed silently. After a while he stood up and left. But I knew that wasn't fatherly love. In the days that followed, I acted like nothing had happened. During the day, I took care of Ruth, washed dishes, cleaned the house, cooked dinner. My father came home from work, ate, drank, sat in his chair to listen to the radio. Everything looked normal from the outside, but the way he looked at me changed. It wasn't a father's gaze anymore. It was something else, and I could feel that sooner or later it would get worse. It didn't take long. His visits to my room became routine. At first he'd sit, touch my hair, my hand, then his fingers started brushing my face, and soon it turned into the rest. Those things you know, sweetheart. Things no child should ever experience. He always came in the dead of night, the whole house silent, only the creaking floorboards echoing. And he came, closed the door, turned off the light, then whispered softly, "Behave, and it won't hurt." I didn't cry. I learned that crying only made him angrier. Pretending I wasn't there was the only defense I had. The next morning I got up early like nothing had happened, made breakfast, cleaned the house, cared for Ruth. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. At school, the teacher praised my grades. The neighbors said I was a strong, mature girl, helping my father. Oh, sweetheart, if only they knew the price of that strength. Around that time, Mr. Chapman, an older neighbor, started noticing something. Every time I passed his yard fetching water from the well, he'd greet me. "You all right, Annie Mae? How's your daddy?" I always answered the same. "I'm fine, sir. Everything's fine." But one day, he stared a little longer, looked at me with those tired but sharp eyes. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I just nodded. I couldn't even answer. I didn't know if I could trust anyone, but I held on to that offer. Deep down, I already knew one day I would need it. And that day, sweetheart, it was still coming. If you made it this far, sweetheart, leave a like for this old lady, will you? It helps me so much to keep going. "You're going to learn to listen, girl." That's what he said the second time he came into my room. This time, he didn't just sit at the edge of the bed like before. He stood there for a moment, looking at me like I was something he owned. I could barely breathe, my hands clenched under the blanket, trying not to shake, trying not to make a sound. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat right next to me. His breath smelled of whiskey, and his eyes were heavy, like he hadn't slept in days. I could feel the weight of his stare crawling over my skin. "I take care of you, of your sister. You owe me your respect." I didn't answer. I didn't move. Inside I was screaming, but on the outside I just laid there, pretending to sleep like I'd done before. My stomach twisted into knots, but I kept my eyes closed. He reached out his hand, touched my cheek, then moved it down my arm, slow, like testing how far he could go. I kept my breathing steady, though it felt like my chest was going to explode. After a while he stood up and left the room. That night he didn't do more than that, but I knew the real storm was only beginning. The next morning, like always, I got up before the sun, cooked breakfast, and helped Ruth get dressed. She smiled at me with her tiny teeth, holding her favorite doll by the arm, completely unaware of the darkness growing inside this house. Daddy sat at the table, sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. He barely looked at me, but I could feel it. That heaviness in the air, thick like syrup, made it hard to swallow. The days that followed were much the same. Every evening after work, he'd come home, drink a little, sit in his chair, listening to the radio while I cleaned up after dinner. Ruth would play quietly in the corner with her dolls. But once the house went quiet and Ruth was asleep, his footsteps would start again, down the hall, toward my door. Sometimes he only stood outside for a while, like he was thinking whether or not to come in. Sometimes he came in, and every time he pushed a little further. He started to sit closer, touch my hair more, whisper things I didn't understand but knew weren't right. "You're growing up, Annie Mae," he said once, his voice low. "A man's got needs, and you're the woman of this house now." I didn't answer. I never did. My fear wrapped around me like a second skin. Outside of this house, life went on like always. The neighbors waved from their porches. The ladies at church whispered about other people's troubles, never suspecting what went on behind our closed doors. And me? I kept my mouth shut and my head down. At school, Mrs. Thompson, my teacher, sometimes looked at me like she wanted to ask something, but she never did. Once, she pulled me aside after class. "You okay at home, Annie Mae?" I forced a smile. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine." She watched me for a moment, like she didn't believe me, but she let it go. Everyone let it go. At night, when Daddy came to my room, I trained myself not to cry. Crying made it worse. He didn't like weakness, and every time I showed it, his voice would change, get colder. "You think you're better than me?" he'd whisper. "You're mine. You belong to me." One night, it went further, much further, the kind of thing a girl should never know. That night, something inside me broke. I felt myself leave my own body, like I was floating above, watching it all happen to someone else. That's how I survived it, by pretending it wasn't happening to me. After that, things changed. He wasn't as cautious anymore. He started locking my door from the inside, started staying longer, started making me sit beside him in the living room after Ruth went to bed. "Come sit by your daddy," he'd say with that fake sweet tone. "You're my good girl." I'd sit there, my body stiff like wood, staring at the floor while his hand rested too long on my leg. Ruth, God bless her little heart, never noticed. She was still too young. She'd fall asleep quickly, her small breaths steady and soft. I protected her as best I could. I kept him away from her. At least I thought I did. The only bit of light I had was Mr. Chapman, our old neighbor. He started noticing more. Every time I passed his house, he'd give me that look, kind but heavy with concern. One day, as I carried a bucket of water back to the house, he walked toward the fence. "You're carrying a heavy load, Annie Mae. I can see it." I swallowed hard, not sure what to say. "If you ever need to talk, child, you know where I am." I nodded. That's all I could do. Words wouldn't come out. After that, he started keeping a closer eye. Sometimes he'd wave from his porch late at night when Daddy would come home drunk, like he was keeping silent watch over us. But I still couldn't risk it. Daddy's threats echoed in my head every time I even thought about telling anyone. "If you open your mouth, girl, I'll bury you right here. Nobody's going to miss you." And I believed him. As weeks turned into months, my body started to change too. Not just because I was growing up, but because the weight of it all was crushing me. I barely ate. My face looked pale in the mirror. My bones started showing. My eyes, once bright, looked empty now. And still, nobody asked. Until one night, everything shifted. He came home later than usual, stumbling, smelling worse than ever. His boots stomped heavy on the floorboards, echoing through the house like a warning. I tried to get Ruth to sleep faster. I held her close, humming softly. "Annie Mae?" His voice slurred from the hallway. I froze. "Come here," he called. I stood up slowly, kissed Ruth's forehead, and walked out. My feet felt like stone as I walked toward him. But that night, something was different. His eyes were meaner, his grip rougher, his voice sharper. "You think you're too old to listen to your daddy now?" I shook my head, my throat dry. "Answer me." "No, sir." He pulled me by the arm, harder than ever before. That night, he didn't bother keeping quiet. And for the first time, Ruth woke up. She came out of the room, her small voice trembling. "Sissy?" I saw her tiny face peek from the hallway. "Go back to bed, Ruth," I shouted, desperate. But Daddy turned, furious. "You shut that brat up or I will." My heart stopped. That's when I realized it wasn't just me anymore. He saw her. He noticed her. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. Interest. I had to protect her. Whatever happened to me, I could not let him start looking at her the way he looked at me. That night, after he finally passed out drunk on the sofa, I sat beside Ruth's bed, holding her tight. She didn't understand, but she clung to me like she felt my fear. And right there, holding my sister in my arms, I made a silent promise. I was going to find a way out. The morning after that night, my hands shook while I poured Daddy's coffee. I couldn't meet his eyes. He sat at the table like nothing had happened, as if the storm from the night before had simply vanished into thin air. Ruth sat quietly across from me, playing with her spoon, too small to understand the shift that had begun. But I saw it. I felt it. The way his gaze lingered on her now. That was new. That was worse. I kept Ruth closer to me all day. Every moment, every task, I made sure she stayed by my side. Washing clothes, fetching water, even cleaning the floors. She was too young to notice my fear, but she didn't protest. She liked being near me. That small comfort kept me breathing. At night, when the house dimmed and his chair creaked under his weight, I pretended to stay busy longer, folding clothes that didn't need folding, wiping counters that were already clean, anything to delay him going to his usual spot outside my bedroom door. But delays only bought me minutes. Eventually, like clockwork, his steps echoed down the hall. He didn't knock anymore. The door creaked open slowly. His shadow filled the room before his voice did. "You ready to be a good girl tonight?" I didn't answer. My voice had become useless during these hours. He closed the door behind him, and the same nightmare replayed. The same game he played, where I pretended to leave my own body just to survive it. But that night, something else crawled inside me besides fear. Anger. A quiet, growing fury that made my hands ball into fists under the blanket while he whispered his twisted words in my ear. I started to realize that as long as I stayed silent, as long as I obeyed, this would never end. And worse, Ruth would be next. The next day, while Ruth napped and Daddy was still at work, I sat on the porch steps staring at the old oak tree in the front yard. My heart pounded against my ribs as I tried to gather courage. That's when I saw Mr. Chapman tending to his garden across the way. He glanced up and caught my eyes. For a moment, I almost stood up, almost crossed that short distance between us, almost told him everything, but my legs wouldn't move. His warning echoed in my head like a drumbeat. "You open your mouth, girl, I'll bury you." I stayed frozen, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Mr. Chapman watched me for another second, like he knew I was struggling, but he didn't approach. Instead, he simply tipped his hat and went back to his work. That night, Daddy was more drunk than usual. The stench of liquor burned my nose as he stumbled through the front door, nearly knocking over Mama's old photograph that still sat on the mantel. His laughter was hollow and loud, bouncing off the thin wooden walls. "Annie Mae!" he slurred, calling me out like I was livestock. I swallowed hard and walked toward him. He grabbed my wrist when I got close, squeezing it hard enough to leave bruises. "You think you're better than me now, huh? Think you got some power over me? You don't. You never will." He yanked me closer, his breath sour against my face. "Don't you forget whose house this is." I nodded quickly, my stomach turning. But all I could think about was Ruth, sleeping just a few feet away, behind a thin bedroom wall. The following morning, I woke up early before Ruth stirred. I sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands trying to plan. But what kind of plan could a girl like me even have? I was 13 now, old enough to see the evil in this world, too young to know how to fight it. The closest thing I had to a mother was gone. The town would never believe a girl like me over a man like him. Mae Sullivan was known as a hard-working widower, trying his best to raise his daughters. That's what everyone thought. Weeks passed. His touches grew bolder in front of Ruth. Small things at first, placing his hand too long on my back while Ruth watched, making me sit beside him during meals, brushing my hair while humming off-key. But I saw his eyes shift toward Ruth more and more, like a wolf waiting for an easier meal. One afternoon, while Daddy was still at work, Ruth fell asleep early, worn out from running in the yard. I sat by her bed, brushing strands of hair off her tiny face. My hands trembled at the thought of what might come. That was when I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, I gathered my courage and walked toward Mr. Chapman's house while Daddy was still away. My legs felt weak, but my determination pushed me forward. He was on his porch, fixing an old wooden chair. "Mr. Chapman," I whispered, barely loud enough to hear myself. He looked up immediately, surprised but calm. "Annie Mae," he said softly, putting down his tools. "You all right, child?" I hesitated, my eyes welling up, my mouth opened, but the words stuck in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pour it all out, but all I managed to say was, I need help." That was enough. His eyes narrowed with understanding. "Come inside, child. We'll talk when nobody's listening." I shook my head violently. "No. If he sees me here, he'll... His face darkened. "I won't let anyone hurt you." All Ruth tears streamed down my face as I finally nodded. He didn't press me for details. He didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. He only said, "You come here when you need to. Anytime." I hurried back home before Daddy returned, my heart pounding. That small step was dangerous, but it was the first real move I made. The seed was planted. That night, Daddy was quiet. Too quiet, as if he sensed the shift. His eyes followed me more closely. His hand clutched my arm a bit tighter when he spoke. "Don't go talking to people who ain't got business with you, Annie Mae." I froze. Had he seen me? Or was it just another one of his games? He leaned closer, his voice a whisper of poison. "I always know what you're up to." I nodded, keeping my eyes low, trying not to show the terror boiling inside me. But deep down, I knew this couldn't go on much longer. One day, either I was going to break, or he was. And that day was coming faster than I feared. I started listening to everything around me, every word, every whisper. My ears stayed open even when my eyes were closed. Every time Daddy stumbled through the door, I'd already know what kind of night it would be just by the sound of his boots scraping across the floor. If his steps were heavy and fast, he was angry. If they dragged slowly, he was drunk enough that maybe, just maybe, I'd get a little mercy. But most nights, mercy never came. Ruth kept playing with her dolls like the world was safe. I envied her innocence, but I also feared it. That innocence was what I was trying to protect, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it safe. Daddy's eyes had started following her more. I saw him watch her when she ran through the yard, or when she giggled at supper. His stare wasn't like a father's anymore. It twisted my stomach into knots every time. I tried to block his view whenever I could. I pulled Ruth onto my lap more often. I made her sit facing me at dinner, keeping her small body away from his long reach. At night, I tucked her in close, humming the same old lullabies Mama used to sing. The soft melodies sometimes kept my own tears back. During the days, I kept visiting Mr. Chapman in secret. I wouldn't stay long, just a few minutes. A quick exchange of glances, a whispered word or two on the way back from the well, or while pretending to gather flowers along the edge of the yard. He never pushed me. He let me come to him at my own pace. "Are you sure you don't want me to tell the sheriff, Annie Mae?" he asked once, his voice barely audible under the warm sun. I shook my head quickly, fear clenching my chest like a fist. "Not yet," I whispered. He sighed but respected my decision. I didn't have the courage to explain that telling the sheriff wouldn't fix anything. Men like Daddy knew how to twist stories. In this town, folks didn't question a man raising his daughters alone. They'd say I was lying, or worse, that I misunderstood his love. People don't like to believe ugly things. One night, while Daddy sat in his chair drinking, Ruth curled up beside me on the floor with her doll. He stared at us, silent, his eyes darting between my face and Ruth's little frame. That night, his silence scared me more than his shouting ever did. When Ruth went to bed, he motioned for me to stay. "Come sit with me," he said, patting the armrest of the chair. I obeyed, my legs trembling as I sat stiffly on the very edge, barely touching the fabric. His hand landed heavy on my knee. I stared at the radio glowing in the corner, pretending it was just the two of us and not the monster and his prisoner. His fingers slowly traced circles on my skin. "You're almost a woman now," he said softly. "You'll learn to take care of your family." My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't dare move. My pulse pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. "And Ruth," he paused, letting my name sit heavy between us. "She's growing up too." The air left my lungs. My worst fear had taken shape, spoken aloud. He wasn't just thinking about it anymore. He was planning. That night, after he finally stumbled into his bedroom, I sat awake in Ruth's room, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The walls felt like they were closing in. My mind spun in circles. I had to act, soon. 2 days later, a storm swept through town. Rain battered the windows. Thunder shook the floors. Daddy stayed home from work that day, sipping whiskey from morning till night. The storm outside felt easier to face than the storm inside that house. At one point, I caught him standing in Ruth's doorway, staring while she napped. My heart stopped. I stepped between them. "She's sleeping," I whispered, forcing my voice steady. He looked at me, his expression dark but amused. "I can see that." He walked past me, brushing my shoulder as he went. His smirk sent cold waves through my spine. The next morning, Mr. Chapman left a small wrapped parcel by the old fence while no one was watching. Inside was a loaf of bread and a few apples. A silent message. He knew I needed help, but also knew I couldn't ask for it yet. I hid the food under the loose floorboard in my room. I had started saving small bits here and there, a slice of bread, dried fruit, anything that could be stored. I didn't know when or how I would need it, but my instincts screamed at me to prepare. The nights grew colder as summer faded. Daddy grew bolder, his patience thinner, his words sharper. "You better not be sneaking around, girl," he growled one evening while cutting into his pork chop. "Ain't nobody gonna help you. Ain't nobody cares." I swallowed my fear with each bite of dinner, forcing my face blank while my stomach twisted. Days turned into weeks. Every morning, I woke up wondering if today would be the day he turned his attention fully to Ruth. Every night, I prayed it wouldn't be. Each hour stretched like rope pulling tighter around my neck. One evening, Ruth woke up crying from a nightmare. I ran to her room and held her, whispering softly until her sobs faded. She clung to me, trembling. "I had a bad dream, Sissy," she whispered. "A monster was here." I kissed her forehead, my own tears threatening to fall. "You're safe, baby," I lied. "You're safe." But neither of us were. A week later, the real turning point came. Daddy came home angrier than I'd seen him in a long while. His face flushed red, fists clenched, eyes wild. I didn't know what had set him off that day, but I knew it would be bad. He slammed the door so hard that Ruth jumped in fright. I rushed her into our shared bedroom, closing the door behind us, trying to calm her racing heart while mine pounded just as fast. Moments later, heavy footsteps stomped down the hallway. The door burst open. "Come here," he barked. I stood up, blocking Ruth behind me. His glare sliced through me like a blade. "You think you can hide from me?" His voice was a low snarl. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising instantly. But this time, Ruth's tiny voice rose behind me. "Leave her alone, Daddy." His head snapped toward her. My stomach dropped. His eyes narrowed, locking onto her like a predator finally spotting easier prey. "Well now," he muttered, his lips curling into a sick grin. "Ain't you getting brave?" I stepped between them, my entire body shaking. "Don't touch her," I whispered. He shoved me aside with a force that knocked me to the floor. My head spun as I crashed onto the wooden boards, my vision blurring. That's when I knew. There was no more waiting, no more planning, no more small steps. I had to run, and I had to do it soon. I stayed on the floor longer than I needed to. My head was spinning, but my mind was racing even faster. I could feel Ruth's tiny hands pulling at my arm, her voice shaky. whispering my name like a prayer. I forced myself up, even though my knees felt like water. Daddy stood over us for a moment, breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling like some beast barely held back. He didn't say another word. Instead, he turned and walked away, slamming the bedroom door behind him with a thud that shook the walls. The silence that followed was almost worse than his shouting. Ruth clung to me, her little body trembling. I stroked her hair, forcing my voice steady. "It's all right, baby. It's over." But we both knew it wasn't. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made my heart jump. The creak of the floorboards, the wind against the windows, the old pipes groaning. It all kept me wide awake, my mind spinning in every direction. I held Ruth close, feeling her soft breath against my arm. My little sister was too young to carry any of this weight. It was all on me. When morning finally broke, the light barely cut through the thick clouds outside. Daddy was already gone, off to work before we even stirred. I stood by the window, staring out at the old dirt road, watching for any sign of Mr. Chapman across the way. His house stood quiet, but I knew he'd be outside sooner or later. When I finally saw him stepping out to feed his chickens, I grabbed Ruth's hand and whispered, "We're going for a walk." We slipped out the back door, careful not to draw any attention. My heart pounded with every step, but I kept my face calm for Ruth's sake. As we approached the fence line, Mr. Chapman looked up, his eyes narrowing with worry when he saw us coming together this time. He didn't say anything right away, just waited as I crossed the few steps to his porch. My voice trembled when I spoke. "I can't wait any more, sir." He nodded slowly, understanding more than my words could say. "Come inside, child." I shook my head again. "He can't see us together, but I need to know how." Mr. Chapman rubbed his chin, glancing around as if the trees themselves could hear. His voice lowered. "You have any place to go?" I shook my head, swallowing hard. "Nobody, just us." He exhaled heavily, his face hardening. "Then you come here. Tomorrow night, after dark. I'll have everything ready." I nodded quickly, my heart thudding in my ears. We didn't stay another second. Ruth and I turned back toward the house before Daddy returned, slipping back inside like nothing had happened. The hours that followed felt endless. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, folding laundry. My hands moved on their own, while my mind screamed with 1,000 worries. What if Daddy suspected? What if Mr. Chapman changed his mind? What if something went wrong? By the time night fell, the fear inside me had grown into something almost unbearable. Daddy came home later than usual, drunk again, stumbling through the door with a wild look in his eyes. His belt hung loose around his waist, and his shirt was half untucked. The air around him reeked of sweat and liquor. He didn't speak much during dinner, just stared at us, especially at Ruth, his eyes narrowing whenever she spoke or giggled softly. I kept feeding her quietly, trying to shield her with my body, but I could feel his gaze burning through me. After supper, he lit a cigarette and sat in his old chair, the one Mama used to sit in. The glow from the tip of the cigarette pulsed like a warning light in the dim room. His eyes never left us. "You two have been awful quiet today," he finally muttered, blowing smoke into the air. "Nothing to say?" I forced a smile, my throat dry. "Just tired, Daddy," he grunted, as if weighing whether to believe me. "You know what happens when girls lie, don't you?" His voice was soft, but it cut deep. I nodded silently, keeping my head down. "Yes, sir." He stared a moment longer, then waved his hand dismissively. "Go put your sister to bed." I grabbed Ruth's hand and led her to our room, closing the door softly behind us. I pressed my ear to the thin wood, listening to his movements. He stayed in that chair a while longer, drinking and muttering to himself. Finally, I heard him stumble toward his own room. That was our last full night in that house. The next morning passed slow and heavy. I kept Ruth close, never letting her wander far. Daddy left early again, and with every hour that ticked by, my nerves wound tighter. The evening sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to creep along the walls, stretching like fingers trying to grab us. When darkness finally settled, I dressed Ruth in her warmest clothes and packed what little we had. 2 small sacks with scraps of food, a blanket, and Mama's old locket that I had hidden under the floorboard for years. I pressed it into Ruth's tiny hand and whispered, "Keep this close no matter what. She nodded, trusting me fully, too young to understand the depth of what we were about to do. We waited until the house was silent. Daddy had returned, drunk again, but this time passed out almost immediately on the living room couch. His snores filled the house like some monster growling in his sleep. I held Ruth's hand tightly, my free hand shaking, as I eased open the back door. The old hinges groaned, but Daddy didn't stir. We slipped into the dark yard, the cool night air biting at our faces. The moon was hidden behind clouds, giving us a bit more cover as we moved toward the fence. Mr. Chapman was waiting by the gate, holding a lantern low to the ground. When he saw us, he gave a small nod and motioned quickly. "Hurry," he whispered. We ran, as quiet as we could, across the dirt and into his yard. My legs shook, not from the running, but from the sheer terror pounding inside me. He led us inside quickly, locking the door behind us. The house smelled faintly of oil and wood smoke, but it felt safe, safer than anywhere I'd been in years. Ruth clung to my side, her eyes wide but calm. Mr. Chapman knelt to her level. "You're safe now, little one," he said gently. She simply nodded, her trust fully resting in me. I squeezed her hand tighter. Mr. Chapman stood, looking me in the eye. "We don't have long. I've arranged for a friend to take you too far away, but we need to move before morning." I swallowed hard, nodding. My chest was tight with fear, but this was our only chance. The thought of staying, of what Daddy might do if he found us gone, it made every risk worth it. We didn't speak much after that. Words weren't needed. The plan was already in motion. But in my gut, a storm still raged, because part of me knew he wasn't going to let us go so easily. The house felt smaller now. Mr. Chapman moved around quietly, gathering the last of what we'd need for the journey. Ruth sat by the table, her small fingers playing with the edge of Mama's locket. She didn't ask many questions, though I could see the confusion swirling in her eyes. She trusted me. That trust was both a comfort and a weight pressing on my chest. Outside, the world was silent. The moon still hid behind thick clouds, casting the yard in deep shadows. I listened to every creak in the house, every soft rustle of wind outside, afraid that at any moment I'd hear Daddy's heavy boots on the road, or worse, his truck pulling into the driveway. My body stayed tense, my heart pounding louder with each minute that passed. Mr. Chapman handed me a small cloth bundle tied tight. "There's enough food for a few days," he whispered. "It won't be much, but it'll keep you moving." I took it, nodding, unable to form words. My throat had gone dry hours ago. He pulled a worn jacket from the back of a chair and draped it over Ruth's shoulders. "You'll need this. It'll get colder before sunrise." Ruth's eyes met mine, wide but calm. She still didn't fully understand why we were leaving, but she clung to my hand tighter, like she knew something bad chased us. Mr. Chapman glanced toward the window again. "The wagon will be here soon. My friend Earl, he'll take you as far as Tennessee. After that, you'll have to make your own way." I swallowed, nodding again, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Running wasn't freedom, it was survival, and survival came with no guarantees. The distant sound of wheels crunching gravel reached my ears. My stomach flipped. Mr. Chapman peeked through the curtains, then turned back to me with a sharp nod. "It's time." We moved quickly. I scooped up the sack, cradled Ruth against my side, and followed him out the back door into the night. The cool air hit my face like a slap, but I didn't slow down. Every step away from that house felt like lifting a brick off my chest. At the end of the property, a dark wagon sat waiting, its lantern dimmed to avoid drawing attention. Earl, a large man with a thick beard, stepped down to meet us. He didn't waste time with greetings. "Get in. We need to move." Ruth climbed up first, her little legs scrambling to find footing, and I followed right behind, pulling the sack close. Mr. Chapman stood by the wagon's side, his face lined with worry. "You stay quiet, you hear me?" he said softly. "Don't stop for anything until you're clear of the county." I nodded, biting my lip hard to keep from crying. This man had done more for us than anyone ever had, but I couldn't allow myself to break down now. As Earl urged the horses forward, I watched Mr. Chapman grow smaller behind us, his silhouette fading into the shadows until he disappeared completely. The wagon bumped along the dirt road, the only sound being the creak of the wheels and the soft clopping of the horses. For miles I kept glancing back, expecting to see headlights appear behind us or hear the roar of Daddy's truck, but the road stayed dark. My muscles remained tense, waiting for something to go wrong. The fear never left my chest. Hours passed. The night grew colder, the wind sharper against our faces. Ruth curled up beside me under the thin blanket, her head resting against my arm. I wrapped both arms around her, trying to shield her from the cold, from the fear, from the world itself. Earl didn't speak much. Occasionally he'd glance back, checking on us with quick, serious eyes. His silence didn't bother me. Words wouldn't change anything now. As dawn crept over the horizon, pale light began to stretch across the fields. We had crossed into another county by then. Earl finally slowed the wagon near a small grove of trees, pulling the horses to a stop. "This is as far as I can take you safely," he said in a low voice. "There's a train depot about 15 miles east. You'll find folks there. Maybe work, maybe shelter." I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. He handed me a folded map with shaky lines drawn in pencil, pointing out the direction we needed to follow. "You be careful, girl," he said, his voice softening. "Don't trust easy. Folks out here can be just as dangerous as what you left behind." I nodded, gripping the map tight. He didn't stay long. With a final glance, he climbed back onto the wagon and rode off into the early morning fog, leaving us alone on the edge of an unfamiliar road. Ruth rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking up at me. "Where are we, sissy?" "Somewhere safe," I whispered, though my insides twisted with uncertainty. We started walking. The dirt road stretched ahead like a ribbon unraveling into the unknown. I kept one hand clutching the sack, the other holding tight to Ruth's small fingers. My legs ached, but I pushed forward, driven by fear more than strength. As the sun rose higher, the road grew rougher. Dust kicked up around our shoes, coating our skirts. Sweat beaded along my back despite the cool air. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. Food had to be rationed carefully. Ruth began to stumble, her little legs too tired to keep up. I scooped her up into my arms, shifting the weight awkwardly, but I couldn't let her stop. Every minute we rested was a minute closer to danger catching up. Hours passed before we saw signs of life again. Faint smoke from chimneys in the distance, distant barking of dogs, and far-off voices we couldn't yet see. The depot had to be near. As we reached a small clearing, a man stepped out from behind a tree. My breath caught. He wasn't someone I recognized. His clothes were worn, his face rough, and his eyes immediately fixed on us. "Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice oily. I froze, clutching Ruth tighter, stepping back instinctively. He took a step forward. "Don't be scared, little lady. You too lost?" His grin made my skin crawl. I could feel Ruth tighten her grip on my dress, burying her face against my chest. "We're fine," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Just passing through." His eyes narrowed, glancing at the sack over my shoulder, sizing us up like prey. "Passing through ain't safe for girls like you," he said softly. "Lot of bad folks out here." I kept backing away, heart pounding louder than my footsteps. "We don't want no trouble," I whispered, praying silently for him to let us go. But he didn't step aside. Instead, he took another step closer, eyes gleaming. My throat tightened. Before anything else could happen, a voice rang out from behind him. "Move along, Frank." The man stiffened, turning his head. Another figure emerged, a tall man with a rifle slung over his shoulder, his face stern. Frank cursed under his breath but didn't argue. He backed away slowly, disappearing into the trees. I didn't breathe until he was gone. The tall man looked at me and Ruth, his voice calmer now. "You're lucky. He's no good." I nodded weakly, tears finally stinging my eyes. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he pointed toward the east. "Depot's about 2 miles that way. Stay on the path." I whispered a shaky "thank you," unable to say more. He tipped his hat and walked off into the woods, leaving us once again on our own. My legs shook, but I held Ruth tighter and kept walking, because I knew we weren't safe yet. The path narrowed as we walked, the dirt beneath our feet turning to hard-packed gravel. My arms ached from carrying Ruth for so long, but I dared not set her down yet. Every time I heard a branch snap or a distant voice carry through the wind, my pulse quickened. Even though the man in the woods had scared off Frank, I knew danger still lurked everywhere. We couldn't afford another mistake. Ruth dozed lightly against my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. The weight of her tiny body was nothing compared to the weight I carried in my chest. I kept moving forward, guided only by the thin strip of road and the growing desperation to reach safety before the pass caught up with us. As the sun moved higher, my legs burned with every step. The air grew heavier, the wind still, as if the world itself was holding its breath with me. Then, through the haze of exhaustion, I spotted a small building in the distance. A thin column of smoke rose from its chimney. Beyond it, wooden tracks glistened faintly under the afternoon light. The depot. Relief washed over me, but I kept my pace steady, cautious. Approaching strangers too eagerly could invite more trouble than it solved. As we neared, I noticed a few people scattered near the platform. 2 men loading crates onto a cart, an older woman sitting under the awning with a basket in her lap, and a man with a station master's cap writing in a small book. I lowered Ruth gently to the ground, brushing the dirt from her dress. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around with quiet curiosity. "We're almost there, baby," I whispered, my voice thin from exhaustion. The station master glanced up as we approached, his expression neutral but curious. I kept my head slightly lowered, trying to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. "Afternoon, ma'am," he greeted, his voice steady but watchful. "You traveling?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Where you headed?" I paused, unsure how much to reveal. "North," I answered finally. He studied me for a moment, eyes flickering to Ruth, then back to my face. "You got folks waiting up there?" I nodded again, though it was a lie. "Family." He didn't press further, simply scribbled something in his book and waved toward the bench under the awning. "Train comes through late tonight. You'll want to rest till then." I thanked him softly and guided Ruth to sit. She leaned against me, too tired to even ask where we were going. My arms wrapped around her protectively while I scanned every person that came and went. Hours passed. The sky deepened into shades of purple and orange. More travelers trickled in, some carrying bags, others chatting quietly. The station master paced along the platform, occasionally glancing in our direction but saying nothing. I forced myself to stay awake, afraid to let my guard down for even a moment. As darkness fell, the sound of a train's distant whistle broke the heavy silence. Steam hissed in the cool air as the engine approached, its headlamp cutting through the night like a glowing eye. The small group of passengers stood, gathering their belongings, preparing to board. I held Ruth's hand tightly as we stepped closer to the edge of the platform. My heart raced with both hope and fear. We were so close now. Just a few more steps, a few more hours, and we'd be farther from Daddy than we'd ever been before. The conductor stepped down, calling out destinations as he opened the doors. People began boarding, filing past us one by one. I clutched the small pouch Mr. Chapman had given me, containing every last dollar he'd managed to spare for us. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for this ride. As I reached the conductor, I handed him the small bundle of money without meeting his eyes. He counted quickly, then nodded, motioning us aboard. We climbed the metal steps, entering the dimly lit car filled with worn benches and the quiet murmur of other travelers settling in. I guided Ruth to a seat near the back, away from the windows. She curled up beside me, her head resting in my lap as she quickly drifted into sleep again. My hand smoothed her hair, my fingers trembling as the train lurched forward with a deep groan. The countryside slipped past in shadows as we moved north. Trees blurred into dark silhouettes under the moonlight. My eyes stayed wide, unable to rest, watching every shape outside like a hawk waiting for danger. Somewhere deep in my chest, I wanted to believe we were safe now, but I couldn't. Daddy had always been good at finding things that didn't belong to him, and we had belonged to him for too long. Hours dragged by. The train stopped at small towns along the way, picking up and dropping off strangers whose faces blurred together in my exhausted mind. Each time the doors opened, my stomach twisted, half expecting to see Daddy standing there, his cruel eyes scanning the passengers, looking for us, but he never appeared. As the sun began to rise again, painting the sky with soft pink and gold, the conductor announced another small town ahead. It wasn't far from where Earl said we should get off. I didn't hesitate. The fewer people knew where we were headed, the better. When the train slowed, I gently shook Ruth awake and whispered, "Come on, baby, time to move." She rubbed her eyes and followed me without complaint, her small hand fitting perfectly into mine as we stepped off the train into unfamiliar streets. The town was small, its buildings worn, its streets quiet in the early morning light. I kept Ruth close as we wandered down the narrow road, scanning for any sign of shelter. My body ached with every step, but I refused to stop until we found somewhere safe to rest. An old church stood at the edge of town, its doors open, soft light spilling from inside. I led Ruth up the steps, peering inside cautiously. Wooden pews lined the room, and at the far end, a man in simple clothes arranged hymn books. He looked up, his face kind but tired. "Can I help you, miss?" I hesitated, then nodded slowly. We need a place to rest." The man studied us for a moment, reading the fear in my eyes without asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. "You're welcome here," he said softly. "Come in." Relief nearly buckled my knees. We stepped inside, the doors closing gently behind us, shutting out the world for the first time in what felt like forever. For the first time since we ran, I allowed myself to breathe. But even then, in the quiet of that church, I knew our journey wasn't over. Daddy would not give up that easily. The church was quiet, except for the creak of the old wooden floor beneath our feet. The man who welcomed us, Pastor Whitaker, led us to a small room behind the sanctuary. There was a simple cot against one wall, a small table beside it, and a faded blanket folded neatly at the foot. To me, it looked like a palace. "This is all I have, but it's yours for now," he said gently. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt too tight. Ruth climbed onto the cot without hesitation, her tiny body curling into the blanket like she hadn't truly rested in weeks. Watching her finally relax brought tears stinging behind my eyes, but I forced them down. There wasn't time to break. Pastor Whitaker didn't ask for details, but I could feel his eyes studying me. He saw what others didn't want to see, the bruises half hidden by my sleeves, the way my shoulders hunched like I was always expecting a blow, the raw edge in my voice when I spoke. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one will bother you." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that someone like him could keep us safe from someone like Daddy, but deep down, I knew better. My father wasn't like other men. He didn't let go of what he claimed as his. For the first time since we fled, my body surrendered to exhaustion. I sat on the edge of the cot, my head falling forward, my arms wrapping around Ruth. My eyelids grew heavy, and before I could fight it, sleep finally dragged me under. I woke to the faint smell of coffee and the distant sound of birds outside the church windows. The sun had risen fully, casting warm light across the room. Ruth was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Pastor Whitaker sat at the small table, sipping from a chipped mug. He glanced up as I stirred, but didn't speak right away. The quiet between us felt calm, not heavy like the silence I knew back home. When I finally found my voice, it came out thin. "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "You're welcome." We sat like that for a while, neither of us filling the space with unnecessary words. But eventually he spoke softly, almost as if thinking aloud. "Sometimes folks show up here running from something too dark to name." I didn't answer. My hands gripped the blanket tighter. "I don't need to know your story, child," he continued, his voice kind. "But if you decide to share, I'll listen." Part of me wanted to pour it all out, to release the years of terror I carried. But my fear chained the words inside me. Speaking it aloud felt too dangerous, as if naming it would summon Daddy right to our doorstep. The day passed slowly. Pastor Whitaker brought us food. Warm bread, a bit of soup, an apple for Ruth. She smiled for the first time in days, her small hands wrapping around the cup he offered her. Seeing that smile again gave me strength I didn't know I still had. Night returned quicker than I wanted. As darkness crept through the windows, my heart began its familiar race. The safety of the church felt fragile. Every creak of wood or gust of wind outside made me flinch. My mind kept returning to one awful truth. Daddy would be looking for us now. The next morning, Pastor Whitaker offered me work cleaning the church. In exchange, we could stay longer. I accepted without hesitation. Every sweep of the broom, every scrub of the floors was worth the price of safety, even if it was temporary. Ruth followed me around the sanctuary while I worked, her laughter filling the hollow space as she chased specks of dust floating in the sunlight. She didn't understand how close we still stood to danger. I envied her innocence, even as I tried desperately to protect it. Weeks slipped by in this small routine. I began to believe, for brief moments, that maybe we had outrun him. Maybe Daddy had given up. The night still brought my fear, but during the days, I allowed myself to breathe. But safety is never permanent for girls like me. One afternoon, as I was scrubbing the pews, Pastor Whitaker entered with a tight expression. He closed the door behind him, glancing toward Ruth before lowering his voice. "There was a man here this morning," he said carefully, "asking questions." My blood went cold. "He was rough-looking," the pastor continued. "Didn't give a name. Said he was looking for his daughters who'd gone missing." I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled and I sat down quickly on the nearest pew to keep from collapsing completely. Did he know we were here?" Pastor Whitaker shook his head. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone like that. But he's close. You need to be ready." The world around me blurred for a moment. My stomach twisted painfully. All those miles, all that running, and still his shadow chased us. That night I barely slept. Ruth clung to me tighter, sensing my terror even if she didn't understand its full shape. Every sound outside the church sent lightning bolts through my chest. I listened to the wind knock against the old windows, imagining Daddy's hands pressing against them. The following day, Pastor Whitaker handed me a small bag and a few crumpled bills. "I know someone who can help you disappear for good," he said quietly. "It's not safe for you here anymore." The thought of running again crushed my lungs, but I knew he was right. Daddy wouldn't stop until he either found us or we vanished completely. And if he found us here, there'd be no second escape. "We leave tonight," I whispered. The pastor nodded, his face heavy with concern. "A man named Samuel will meet you on the North Road after dark. He's helped others before. Trust him." As the sun dipped lower that evening, I prepared Ruth once again. The bag felt lighter than before, most of our few belongings left behind. Only what we needed remained: food, a blanket, Mama's locket. When night finally fell, I hugged Pastor Whitaker for the last time. His voice was low but steady. "God go with you, child." I nodded, unable to stop the tears that finally fell. Then, with Ruth's hand in mine, we slipped into the darkness once more. The road was empty, the stars hiding behind thick clouds. Each step felt like walking on glass, every sound amplified by my pounding heart. My eyes darted to every shadow, every tree, waiting for him to jump out from the dark. Ahead, a lantern flickered faintly near the bend. A man stood waiting, his broad figure barely visible in the dim glow. "You Annie Mae?" he called softly. I stopped, gripping Ruth closer. My voice cracked as I answered. "Yes, Pastor sent me," he said, stepping forward slowly. "We ain't got much time. Let's go." I hesitated for a moment longer, but there was no choice. I followed him off the main road, into the trees, further into the unknown. My heart screamed with fear, but my legs kept moving, because the only thing scarier than running was standing still. Samuel moved quickly through the woods, his steps confident despite the darkness that swallowed the path ahead. I followed closely behind, holding Ruth's hand so tightly I worried I might hurt her, but I couldn't loosen my grip. The fear wouldn't let me. Every few steps I glanced back, half expecting to see Daddy's figure emerge from the trees, his face twisted with rage. But there was only darkness behind us. The forest seemed endless, branches reaching like bony fingers above us, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Ruth stumbled once on a hidden root, and I caught her before she fell. She whimpered softly, but I whispered in her ear, promising gently that we were almost safe. I didn't believe my own words, but she needed to hear them. After what felt like hours, Samuel finally slowed, raising his lantern to reveal a small cabin tucked into a clearing. The roof sagged slightly, the walls weathered, but to me it looked like a miracle. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney, signaling that someone was already inside. Samuel turned to me, his voice low but calm. "You'll rest here tonight. We'll move again at first light." I nodded, my throat too dry to answer. Inside the cabin, an older woman stirred a pot over a small fire. Her face was lined with years, but her eyes were sharp, studying me and Ruth as we entered. She wiped her hands on her apron and motioned toward a thin mattress on the floor. "The little one can sleep here," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Ruth didn't need much convincing. She curled into the blankets without a word, exhaustion dragging her into sleep almost instantly. I knelt beside her for a moment, brushing hair from her face, whispering soft prayers that no longer felt strong enough. The woman handed me a cup of warm broth. "Eat, child. You'll need strength for what's ahead." I accepted it with shaking hands, the heat soothing the cold that had burrowed into my bones. Samuel sat near the door, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes watching the window like a hawk. No one spoke much. Words weren't needed. We all knew what chased us. Through the thin walls the wind howled, but every other sound made my heart jump. A snapping branch, distant footsteps that could have been animals. Or worse. I stayed awake long after everyone else slept, my ears straining for any sign that Daddy had found our trail. My mind painted terrible pictures of him crashing through the door, dragging us back into his nightmare. The fear was a weight pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. When the sky finally began to pale, Samuel stirred and stood. Time to go. I helped Ruth up, her little face still heavy with sleep. The older woman handed me a small sack of food and wrapped a scarf around Ruth's neck. She squeezed my shoulder gently, her eyes offering comfort without words. We stepped outside into the bitter morning air. The cold bit through my thin coat, but I ignored it. Every step forward was another mile between us and Daddy. The forest thinned as we moved north. Samuel led us along hidden trails, avoiding main roads, always glancing over his shoulder as if expecting danger to step out at any moment. Hours blurred together. My legs ached, my feet raw inside my worn shoes. But I never slowed. Ruth grew quieter, her energy draining with each passing mile. I carried her whenever I could, her head resting against my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. We passed through small towns, never stopping long. Samuel spoke to people I didn't know, arranging rides, finding places for us to hide. His network of strangers, people who owed him favors or simply hated men like my father, helped us inch farther away. But no matter how far we went, I could still feel Daddy breathing down our necks. The fear followed us like a shadow that refused to fade. Days later, we reached another safe house, this one larger, sitting at the edge of a small river. A couple met us at the door, their faces kind but wary. They welcomed us inside, offering food, warm baths, and clean clothes that smelled of lavender. For a brief moment, sitting at their wooden table while Ruth ate bread and honey, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. But peace, I knew, was temporary. That night, while the house slept, I lay awake again, staring at the low ceiling beams. My mind replayed every horrible moment from home. The nights when Daddy slipped into my room, his breath thick with whiskey, his hands rough and heavy, the threats he whispered into my ear, the way he claimed us like property. Even now, far away, I could still hear his voice, sharp as broken glass. My stomach twisted each time I imagined him finding Ruth, his eyes darkening like they had before. That thought kept me moving, even when my body wanted to collapse. By the time morning arrived, Samuel was ready to move again. The couple handed me another bundle of food and a small envelope of money. "It isn't much," the man said softly, "but it should get you further." I thanked them through the lump in my throat, holding Ruth's hand tightly as we stepped out into the chilly air once again. We crossed the river by boat, the current swift and cold beneath us. Ruth shivered in my arms, and I wrapped the blanket tighter around her small frame. The journey continued, each day blurring into the next. The landscape changed slowly, the air colder, the towns quieter, the roads emptier. Samuel remained focused, guiding us steadily, speaking only when necessary. He didn't offer comfort, but his presence was strong, steady, a rope pulling me through the storm. As we neared the mountains, the ground grew rougher, the air thinner. The path narrowed into twisting trails, lined with sharp rocks and brittle trees stripped bare by the wind. Ruth coughed softly, her breath visible in the frozen air. I carried her more often now, her small body lighter than before, her eyes dull with fatigue. One evening, as the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, Samuel led us to a narrow cabin, tucked into a hollow. An older man waited there, his beard white as snow, his eyes sharp beneath a thick wool hat. He spoke in quiet tones, asking few questions. He didn't need answers. He recognized what we were, fugitives from something darker than most men dared name. Inside the cabin, the fire burned hot, warming the small space. Ruth fell asleep quickly, curled beneath layers of thick blankets. I sat near the flames, watching the flicker of light dance across the walls, my body finally surrendering to its ache. Samuel sat near the door as always, his gaze fixed on the window, never fully at ease. Later that night, as I dozed lightly, I heard him speak for the first time since we left the last house. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "We're getting close to the border." I opened my eyes, meeting his stare. "You think he's still following?" Samuel didn't answer right away. His face remained unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he nodded once. A man like him don't let go easy. The truth of it hung heavy in the air. No matter how far we ran, Daddy's reach stretched longer than any road. The farther we got, the more desperate he would become. I closed my eyes again, pulling Ruth closer, listening to the wind howl outside. Tomorrow, we would move again, because running was the only thing left keeping us alive. The morning light barely pierced through the thin slits of the cabin walls, but I was already awake, my eyes heavy, my body stiff from another restless night. Ruth slept soundly, curled against my side beneath layers of blankets. Her breathing remained steady, a quiet rhythm that comforted me even as my nerves twisted tighter with each passing hour. Samuel stood by the door, boots laced tight, his eyes scanning the trees outside like he was expecting something to crawl out of the woods at any moment. His silence didn't scare me. His silence had become familiar, like a barrier holding back the panic always threatening to rise inside me. When Ruth finally stirred, I gently brushed the hair from her face, whispering that we needed to move again. She didn't ask where we were going anymore. She simply nodded, trusting me completely. That trust broke my heart more than anything. She shouldn't have had to trust me with this. She should have been home, playing with dolls, worrying about nothing more than scraped knees and bedtime stories. But instead, she was running alongside me, her childhood shrinking with every mile. Samuel led us out as the wind howled low through the trees. The ground was frozen beneath our feet, each step crunching softly under the weight of our worn shoes. The path narrowed as we climbed further into the hills, the trees growing thinner, their branches bare like reaching arms. I held Ruth close, wrapping the blanket tighter around her frail frame as we moved deeper into the cold. The mountains loomed larger ahead of us. Samuel had said the border was near, and once we crossed it, the chances of Daddy finding us would finally shrink. But I wasn't naive enough to believe that completely. Even now I could feel him close, like some heavy breath on the back of my neck. No distance ever seemed far enough. As we reached a ridge, Samuel paused, his hand lifting sharply to stop us. My heart jumped. I crouched quickly beside Ruth, pulling her behind me, shielding her with my body like I had done so many times before. Samuel crouched low, his eyes locked on something ahead in the distance. I followed his gaze and saw it, a figure standing by the tree line below. My breath caught in my throat. Even from this distance, I recognized the shape, the posture, the way the man's shoulders squared like he owned every inch of ground beneath him. My stomach twisted violently. Daddy! How he had found us I didn't know. Maybe he had never been far behind. Maybe someone had spoken. Or maybe men like him just always knew how to sniff out what belonged to them. Samuel cursed under his breath, pulling his rifle into position. He didn't speak, but his jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed as he tracked Daddy's slow movements below. My breath came out in short bursts, fogging the air as my panic swelled. I clutched Ruth's trembling hand, feeling her press her face into my side, trying to disappear. Daddy paced slowly, scanning the trees like a hunter waiting for prey to make a mistake. He wasn't alone. Another man stood behind him, shorter, stockier, with a rifle slung across his chest. My fear deepened. Daddy had brought help. Samuel leaned in close, whispering low enough that only I could hear. "We don't have much time." I nodded, though my whole body threatened to freeze in place. The nightmare I had run from was standing in front of me, closer than ever. My mind spun wildly, searching for any way out. Running would expose us. Hiding might only delay what felt inevitable. Samuel's voice came again, sharper this time. Listen to me. You take Ruth and head west through that ravine. Stay low. Don't stop. I'll draw them away." The words punched through my panic, but I shook my head immediately, my voice breaking. "Number, we can't leave you." He didn't argue. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder, steady, strong. "If they catch you, he'll never let you go again. You know that." The truth of it stabbed through my chest. I looked down at Ruth, her wide eyes shimmering with silent terror. She didn't understand the full danger, but she felt it pressing down like I did. Samuel nodded once, then slipped down the ridge quietly, his rifle ready. I grabbed Ruth's hand tighter and turned toward the ravine, moving as quickly and silently as my legs allowed. The wind howled louder, covering the crunch of our steps as we slipped into the narrow gully lined with rocks and twisted branches. Behind us, the sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. My heart nearly stopped. Ruth whimpered, but I pulled her forward, forcing her tiny legs to move faster, stumbling together over the uneven ground. Another shot rang out, followed by shouting. Samuel's voice carried faintly through the trees, sharp commands and curses mixing with Daddy's furious screams. I didn't dare look back. My only focus was keeping Ruth moving, step after step, through the frozen brush. The ravine twisted and narrowed, funneling us deeper into the woods. My lungs burned, my legs shaking with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. The image of Daddy's face, twisted with rage, burned behind my eyes, driving me forward even as my strength faltered. Branches scratched at my arms, tearing the thin fabric of my coat. My breath came in ragged gasps, but Ruth clung to me, her small hand gripping mine with surprising strength. Hours seemed to pass as we fled deeper into the wilderness, though it may have only been minutes. Every sound made my head snap around. Cracking branches, snapping twigs, the wind roaring through the trees like angry voices. I expected to see him burst from the shadows at any moment. Finally, the ravine widened into an open clearing. My legs buckled, and I collapsed to my knees, clutching Ruth against my chest. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. I scanned the tree line wildly, half expecting Daddy's face to appear through the branches. But the woods remained still. Only the wind answered. I pulled Ruth tighter, whispering through gasps of breath, "We're okay, baby, we're okay." I didn't believe it yet, but I needed her to believe it. For the first time since Samuel had split from us, I allowed my tears to fall. Silent, hot tears that stung my frozen cheeks. I prayed silently that Samuel had escaped, that his plan had worked, that he'd somehow bought us enough time. The sky darkened again as night approached. We huddled beneath the cover of a fallen tree, its roots exposed like twisted fingers reaching for the sky. I wrapped the blanket tighter around us, trying to block out the cold, trying to slow my racing mind. I didn't know where we would go next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. We were not going back. The cold pressed deeper into my bones as the night dragged on. I sat beneath the fallen tree, my arms wrapped around Ruth, pulling her small body tightly against mine to share whatever little warmth we still had left. Her breathing was soft but shallow, her head resting against my chest. I could feel her heartbeat under my fingertips, steady and fragile like a small drum keeping me anchored. The darkness around us was thick, swallowing every sound except for the wind that moaned through the trees. I kept my ears open for anything else, footsteps, voices, the snap of a branch, but the forest remained silent. That silence didn't comfort me. It felt like a heavy hand pressing on my chest, reminding me that danger still waited somewhere beyond the shadows. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every step we had taken to get here. The long nights hiding in barns, the whispered conversations with strangers who offered shelter without asking for our story, the hours spent clutching Ruth's hand as we ran from the nightmare that chased us through state lines. I could still see Daddy's face when I closed my eyes, his eyes burning with that familiar rage, his voice twisting through my head like barbed wire. No matter how far we ran, he followed. Ruth stirred slightly, mumbling softly in her sleep. I stroked her hair gently, whispering nonsense words to soothe her. She didn't wake, but her small hand found mine, her fingers curling around my thumb like she used to do when she was a baby. That tiny touch held me together more than anything else could. The hours crawled. My body ached from exhaustion, but I refused to let sleep pull me under. I couldn't afford to close my eyes. Not yet. The image of Daddy emerging from the trees haunted me every time my head started to droop. As the first pale light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting thin streaks of gray and pink through the bare branches, I finally allowed myself to breathe a little deeper. The night was over. We had made it through one more, but the sun rising didn't erase the weight pressing on my chest. We were still alone, still running, still trapped in a nightmare that had no clear ending. When Ruth finally opened her eyes, she blinked at me sleepily, her voice a soft whisper. "Is it morning?" I nodded, forcing a tired smile. "Yes, baby, morning." She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes and looking around. The woods looked less terrifying under daylight, but I knew better than to trust appearances. I stood, stretching my stiff legs and scanning the trees. No sign of Samuel, no sign of Daddy, only silence. We started walking again, our feet dragging over frozen ground. My legs trembled with each step, but I kept moving, forcing my body forward by sheer will. I didn't know where we were going anymore. The map we once followed had long since become useless. I was walking on instinct now, hoping that every mile we put behind us made it harder for him to find us. As the morning grew warmer, we stumbled upon a narrow road cutting through the woods. I hesitated before stepping onto it. Roads were dangerous. Roads meant being seen. But we couldn't keep wandering the forest forever. My stomach ached with hunger, and Ruth's face had grown pale beneath her layers of clothes. We followed the road cautiously, staying close to the edge where the trees offered some cover. After what felt like hours, the road curved toward a small cluster of buildings, a tiny settlement, no more than a handful of houses, a general store, and a church with a crooked steeple. Smoke drifted from a few chimneys. The sight of people both comforted and terrified me. We entered the town slowly, drawing quiet glances from a few locals tending to their morning chores. A woman sweeping a porch paused, watching us with cautious eyes, but said nothing. An older man seated outside the store nodded politely as we passed. No one asked who we were or where we had come from. Maybe they saw enough in my face to know not to ask. Inside the general store, the warm air smelled of tobacco and old wood. The man behind the counter looked up as we entered, his eyes settling on Ruth first, then on me. "You girls traveling alone?" he asked, his voice even, not unkind. I swallowed hard, my voice dry. "Just passing through." He studied us for a long moment but didn't press further. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a small paper bag. "Take this," he said, placing a few pieces of bread, cheese, and an apple inside. "No charge." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I managed to whisper a soft, "Thank you." He nodded once, like he'd seen plenty of folks like us before. We left the store and sat beneath a large oak tree, sharing the simple meal in silence. Ruth smiled as she bit into the apple, her cheeks finally showing a bit of color again. Watching her gave me a momentary flicker of peace, but it didn't last long. As the afternoon shadows stretched across the town, my stomach twisted again. I kept scanning every road, every stranger passing by. My nerves refused to settle. The fear hadn't left me for weeks. It had become part of my blood. That's when I saw it. A truck. Old. Rusted. Familiar. It rolled slowly down the main road, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. My heart stopped. My breath froze. Behind the wheel sat the face I feared more than any monster in any nightmare. Daddy. His eyes scanned the town as he drove, his head turning from side to side, searching. He was here. Somehow, some way, he had found us again. Panic surged through my veins. I grabbed Ruth's hand and whispered, "We have to go. Now." She didn't argue, sensing the danger immediately. We slipped behind the church, ducking low, our footsteps muffled by the dirt. My chest heaved with panic, but I forced myself to stay quiet. If he saw us, it would be over. We moved quickly, circling toward the back of the town where the forest began again. My legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not now. Behind us, I heard the truck's engine grow louder as he circled the streets, hunting us like a wolf stalking its prey. My vision blurred from tears, but I kept moving, Ruth stumbling beside me, clutching my hand with everything she had. We reached the edge of the trees and slipped into the cover of the woods once more. The branches scratched at my skin, tearing at my sleeves as we pushed through the undergrowth. My breath came in sharp gasps, but I didn't dare slow down. Then, in the distance, I heard shouting. His voice, calling my name. "Annie Mae!" The sound of it cut through me like a blade. My grip on Ruth tightened as I whispered frantically, "Don't look back, baby. Keep going." We ran until my legs collapsed beneath me. I pulled Ruth to the ground, covering her with my body as we hid beneath a thick tangle of bushes. My hands trembled as I held her close, listening for the sounds of footsteps drawing near. But after what felt like hours, only silence remained. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. We stayed hidden until darkness swallowed the forest again. Only when the stars appeared above us did I allow myself to move, my body weak, my mind spinning. Ruth lay quietly against me, her breathing steady, her eyes closed in sleep. I stared up at the sky, my chest rising and falling in slow, exhausted waves. I didn't know if we had finally escaped him. I didn't know if tomorrow would bring safety or if we'd have to run again. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed one small thought to whisper inside me. Maybe we were free. If you made it all the way here, sweetheart, don't forget to leave a like for this old lady, all right? And let me know in the comments what you thought. It was heavy, wasn't it? But it needed to be told.